Can AMD's crazy powerful integrated graphics beat Nvidia's RTX 4060 laptop GPU? I've compared both in 25 games at 1080p and 1440p to find out. On the AMD side, we've got ASUS's new Flow Z13, a 13-inch tablet with AMD's Ryzen AI Max Plus 395. Stupid product name aside, this chip has the most powerful integrated graphics I've ever seen. It can easily run modern games at 1440p high settings, no problem. Then on the Nvidia side, we've got the RTX 4060 in my Lenovo Legion Slim 5, a 15-inch gaming laptop from a couple of years ago. Look, there's an obvious size difference here, and that matters when it comes to laptops, because more space means better cooling, higher power limits, and more performance. But right now, the Ryzen Max Plus 395 only exists in the smaller Z13. But despite the size difference, CPU performance from the newer Zen 5 processor in the Z13 smashes the older Zen 4 architecture in my Legion, with a 60% higher multi-core score and 10% higher single-core score. So this will contribute to some of the performance differences in addition to the GPU differences. Just before we dive into the games, I'm running the RTX 4060 at the full 100 watt power limit. I could have arbitrarily lowered it to match the Z13's 75 to 93 watt power limit, but I think this is way more realistic than creating a fake scenario for fairness. Let's be real, you can buy 2 or 3 of these 4060 laptops for the price of this Z13. So if you've got this kind of budget, any 4060 laptop you'll get will have full power limit. The Z13 also lets you set how much VRAM you want the GPU to use. My Z13 has 32 gigs of total memory, so if I give it 16 gigs of VRAM, then it only has 16 gigs of system memory available. Honestly, in most cases, for a GPU of this tier, I'd prefer to give it 8 gigs and then have 24 gigs of system memory available. Plus, this matches the 8 gig VRAM capacity in the 4060, so that's how I've tested. But spoiler, I tested a few games on the Z13 at 8 gigs of VRAM and 16 gigs of VRAM and didn't see a notable difference. Alright, let's see how these two compare in 25 games. It's a great start for AMD in Alan Wake 2, with a 6% higher average FPS at the lower 1080p resolution, and a larger 8% lead at the higher 1440p resolution. Of course, we're only talking about a 3 FPS gap, which isn't really meaningful, but hey, winning's winning. If we turn on ray tracing and set upscaling to quality, Nvidia pulls out ahead at 1080p, but AMD still gets the win at 1440p. This surprised me, considering how it's generally accepted that Nvidia has superior ray tracing performance compared to AMD. Sure, there's only a 1 frame difference in the average, but AMD had fewer dips in performance and a more stable experience, as per the higher 1% low. Now, we can't forget that there will be a visual difference between AMD and Nvidia, because I'm using FSR on AMD and DLSS on Nvidia, and based on testing from Hardware Unboxed, DLSS is generally superior. And before someone starts typing,
actually Jared, you could run FSR on the Nvidia laptop.
True, but let's be real. If you've got an Nvidia laptop, you're going to be prioritizing DLSS where available, as it's a better option. So that's how I've tested with upscaling for the ray tracing results. It's very close in Cyberpunk 2077 at ultra settings. There's basically no difference at 1080p, while AMD had notably fewer dips in performance at 1440p, as shown by the higher 1% low. But Nvidia's superior ray tracing performance makes itself known once we enable the RT Ultra preset. Granted, I wouldn't personally be looking to run RT on either of these GPUs, but near 60 FPS at 1080p on the 4060 isn't too bad, and it's a massive 31% lead over AMD too. Nvidia wins in Marvel Rivals, coming out 9% faster at 1080p and 13% faster at 1440p. But I mean, AMD is still above 60 FPS at 1440p high settings. Not bad at all from what is essentially a 13-inch tablet. The 4060 has a similar lead in Space Marine 2 at 1080p, at least in terms of average FPS, but AMD had much more stuttering here in comparison, hence the much lower 1% low result. Things are much closer at 1440p though, with AMD actually slightly ahead when it comes to average FPS, but still behind in the 1% low department. game, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is an interesting one. This game was the biggest win for AMD out of all 25 games tested in terms of average FPS. The results looked pretty sus, but I triple-checked them. The strange results continue with ray tracing enabled. Technically, AMD was ahead with higher average frame rates, but honestly, the game felt smoother with Nvidia, and that's reflected by the higher 1% lows. Not only that, but running the game on Nvidia looked better too, presumably due to the benefits of DLSS over FSR. It's not all about having the best average frame rates. Black Myth Wukong was ahead on Nvidia by a fair margin. Even the 1% lows from the 4060 were ahead of the average FPS from AMD at 1440p, but at least AMD is still playable, because AMD's 8060S graphics become unusable once ray tracing is enabled at the lowest setting. Considering how big the gap is here compared to other games where RT wasn't as bad, I have to imagine this is something that will hopefully be improved in a future game or driver update. Stalker 2 had one of the biggest wins for Nvidia at 1080p with a 29% higher average frame rate. Even the 1% lows from Nvidia are higher than the average FPS coming from AMD. Again, these results looked so sus, I triple-checked them, but as best I can tell, they're correct. It's especially strange when you consider how much closer things are at the higher 1440p resolution. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 was better with Nvidia, but the 4060 only had a 7% lead at 1080p and 6% at 1440p. Both had playable frame rates at high settings and without upscaling. I just had to test Borderlands 3 after AMD claimed their 8060S graphics was 68% faster than Nvidia's RTX 4070 in this game at 1080p. Although it's mostly a win for AMD here, keep in mind I'm comparing with the lower tier 4060, and AMD was only 9% ahead here. Now, AMD was comparing to a 50-watt 4070 in the Z13, so their claim is certainly possible. I just want to show that the gap isn't anywhere near as big compared to a normal 4060. Results from Red Dead Redemption 2 were unexpected. I've used this game in my laptop reviews for years now, and have generally found it to favor AMD graphics, but that's not the case with the 8060S. In fact, this was one of the biggest wins for Nvidia out of all 25 games tested, so I ran the tests again on another day, but got the same results. Instead of individually talking through the rest of the 15 games tested, I'll just quickly skip through the results so that we can move on. But feel free to pause the video if you want a closer look at any specific game. It's important to test a wide selection of games so we can get an accurate picture of the average performance differences to make a fairer conclusion. Like I always say, more data equals more better. But yeah, in more cases than not, there's a clear edge for the 4060. On average, over all 24 games tested that didn't have ray tracing enabled, at 1080p, Nvidia's RTX 4060 was almost 13% faster compared to AMD's 8060S integrated graphics. AMD was only ahead in 4 of the 24 games, but 6 of the games only had less than a 10% higher frame rate with the 4060. The problem for AMD is most of the other games had double-digit performance gains with the 4060. The gap closes a little in favor of AMD at the higher 1440p resolution, where the 4060 was now 8% faster in our 24-game average without ray tracing. These results kinda make me wish I'd tested the 4060 with a lower power limit, but like I said before, I think it's more important to be realistic than to create a fake scenario for fairness. Here's how things look if we instead average the frame rates of all 24 non-ray traced games. I think this better shows just how well the 8060S is holding up. It's close to averaging 60 FPS in my selection of games at 1440p, and I used a mixture of mostly high settings with some ultra in there. As for ray tracing, well, it looks like a big win for Nvidia, mostly due to the huge Black Myth Wukong outlier. Again, I'd be super surprised if AMD doesn't improve here with a game or driver update, because none of the other games had anywhere near as big of a lead with the 4060. I mean, the fact that Spider-Man 2 and Alan Wake 2 had higher average FPS with ray tracing at 1440p on AMD was kind of impressive considering Nvidia's history with superior RT. So the higher powered RTX 4060 in the bigger laptop with better cooling is generally, but not always, better in games. But the performance from the Z13 is seriously impressive from what are essentially beefy integrated graphics. Yeah, they're not cheap. You could buy an RTX 4080 gaming laptop for less than the Z13, which will obviously absolutely destroy it in games. But this is still unlocking a new level of performance in such a portable size. And I think that's very interesting. Now, it'd probably be a bit of a different story if we tested with a lower powered 4060, but at the same time, you could buy 2 or 3 of these laptops for the same price as one of these. So it just seems silly to compare this against an even cheaper 4060 laptop that would have a lower power limit, like an MSI GF63, which costs about a quarter of the price of a Z13. Everything else on the Z13, like CPU performance, thermals, battery life, and more, will be covered in the upcoming full review video, so make sure that you're subscribed for that. Until then, you can find out why Nvidia's new RTX 50 gaming laptops probably aren't going to be that great. Your best option might be finding a great deal on an older model. You'll see why over in that one next.